Are you trying really hard not to kiss me right now? She said it in a flooded basement barefoot, holding a flashlight, water still dripping from a cracked pipe 2 feet away. Ethan Walker, divorced, guarded a man who had spent 2 years building walls with the same hands he used to fix everything else went completely still. He didn't deny it. He didn't move. He just looked at her, this woman he had known for exactly 3 weeks, and felt the most carefully constructed version of himself begin to crack. Yes, he said. One word. And nothing between them was ever the same again. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go. Ethan Walker had one rule about Sundays. Nobody touched them. Not his ex-wife Dana. Not his clients. Not his business partner Marco, who had a gift for calling at the exact wrong moment. Sunday was the one day Ethan had negotiated back from the wreckage of his former life and kept entirely for himself. No jobs, no conversations that required anything from him emotionally. Just silence, baseball, and the specific peace of a man who has decided deliberately and with full awareness that he is done opening doors. His daughter Sophie was at her mother's this weekend. The house was quiet in the way that used to feel lonely, and now just felt like relief. He was on his second slice of cold pizza bottom of the 7th inning when his phone rang. Unknown number. He stared at it. 4 rings. 5. Something made him pick up. He would never be able to explain what. Hello. Silence for half a second. Then, I need you to come over right now and please don't tell anyone you're coming. Ethan sat up straight. The voice was female. Controlled, the bone-deep kind of control that comes from years of practice, but underneath the control was something raw and urgent, like a current running under ice. Who is this? He asked. I'm sorry, I'm Lily. Lily Harrington. I live next door. I moved in 3 weeks ago. We've waved, he said. Yes. A breath. I got your number from the neighborhood directory app. I hope that's... I'm sorry to call out of nowhere. I know this is strange. Why can't I tell anyone I'm coming? He asked. Another pause, shorter this time, like she'd been expecting the question and was deciding how much truth to give it. Because I don't want my landlord to know there's a problem until I understand how bad it is, she said. Please, there's water coming in and I don't know how bad it is and I need someone who knows what they're looking at. Ethan was already standing. Not because of the water, because of the way she said please. Like it cost her something significant. Like she was a person who did not say please easily or often, or without knowing exactly what she was asking for. Give me 3 minutes, he said, and hung up. She opened the door before he reached the porch. That was the first thing he noticed. She'd been watching for him through the window, which meant she'd been standing there waiting, which meant she was more rattled than her voice had let on. The second thing he noticed was her feet. Bare. Which meant she'd already been downstairs and come back up fast enough that she hadn't stopped to put shoes on. The third thing, and this one he filed away without meaning to, was that she was more striking in person than she'd seemed from across the yard. Dark hair pulled back in the fast, unthought way of someone who'd been dealing with a crisis. Eyes that were currently doing 2 things at once, sharp and scared simultaneously, like a person who was used to being the one with the answers and was finding this particular problem inconvenient. It's under the stairs, she said immediately. Basement. I heard it about 40 minutes ago and I thought it was just the pipes settling, and then I went to get something from storage and there was water on the floor and it's... She stopped, pressed her lips together. It's spreading. Show me, he said. He heard it before he saw it. That thin, pressurized hiss, the sound of water finding its way through a gap it was never supposed to touch. In 15 years of working on houses, Ethan had learned that sound the way a doctor learns a particular kind of cough. It told him things before his eyes confirmed them. This was not a drip. This was a fracture under pressure. This was a pipe that had been quietly failing for a while, and had finally chosen tonight to stop pretending. He crouched, moved toward the wall under the stairs and found it. Copper pipe. Original to the house by the look of it. Oxidized green along the joints installed by someone who knew what they were doing 40 years ago, but couldn't have known what 40 years of pressure changes would do to a hairline weak point in a joint they'd probably been proud of. The fracture was small, but it was going. "How long has this house been sitting vacant?" he asked, without turning around. 8 months, the realtor said. "That's enough." He was already reaching into his bag. When nobody's running water through a system regularly, pressure builds inconsistently. Temperature cycles stress the joints. This one was probably always a little weak. The vacancy just gave it time to become a problem. "Can you fix it tonight?" "I can stop it tonight. Fixing it properly takes parts I don't have on me." He pulled out his pipe clamp. "Do you have towels? I've been using all of them." "Get them. Wring them out in whatever sink you have down here and bring them back. I need to slow the spread while I get the clamp on." She moved without a word. No protest, no extra questions, no hovering. Just moved. He registered this the same way he'd registered the bare feet and the watching from the window, quietly, without attaching meaning to it. He got to work. The space was tight. He had to angle sideways, left shoulder, pressed against the drywall, right arm extended into the gap at an angle that was going to ache tomorrow. The pipe was old enough that he had to be precise, too much force, and he'd crack it wider. Turn a manageable problem into a disaster. He was precise. He was always precise. It was the one quality he had never doubted in himself, even when everything else was falling apart. "Here." Lily was back, crouching beside him with the towels closer than he'd expected. "Can you hold the flashlight?" he said. He pointed to the small light he'd propped against the wall. "Right there, don't move it." She took it, aimed it, held it absolutely still. He worked, 30 seconds, a minute, 2. "Is it bad?" she asked quietly. Not demanding, just asking, on a scale of 1 to 10. He tightened the clamp a careful quarter turn. 4, which is lucky. 3 weeks ago when you moved in, this might have been a 2. 3 months from now, it would have been an 8. So I caught it in time. Your floors caught it in time. You just got notified. He felt more than saw her reaction to that, a small exhale that might have been a laugh. "I Googled basement leak when it started," she said. "The first result told me my foundation might be compromised and the house could be structurally unsound. Did it also tell you to pour vinegar on it?" 7th result. "The internet has killed more pipes than cold weather." He made the final adjustment, sat back, looked at the joint. "Okay, that's holding. Check back every couple hours tonight. Call me immediately if it starts going again." He stood and turned. She was still crouching, flashlight in hand, looking up at him, and for the first time since he'd walked through her door, there was no emergency between them, no active crisis to hide behind. Just two people in a damp basement, closer than they'd stood in the 3 weeks they'd been neighbors, and the particular charged quiet that happens when adrenaline starts to drain away and something else starts to fill the space it leaves behind. "Thank you," she said. It was simple, direct, no performance in it. "Don't thank me yet," he said and looked away. "Come on, show me where your water main shutoff is." She didn't know where it was. This was somehow the funniest thing Ethan had encountered in months, not because she was incompetent, but because of the expression on her face when she admitted it, like she was confessing to a crime she hadn't known was on the books. "I own a design consultancy," she said with a particular dignity that made it worse. "I can specify tile grout for 14 different substrate types. I have never in my life needed to know where a water main shutoff was. First-time homeowner." A pause that lasted half a beat too long. "Technically," she said, "yes. I was always renting before." He filed away the technically and the before and said, "Come on, I'll show you." He found it in 7 seconds behind a panel in the utility corner that she'd probably never opened. He showed her, made her turn it herself twice, so she'd remember the motion, and then walked her through the 3 other things every person should know about their own house, that most people don't find out until something goes wrong. She paid attention the way she'd held the flashlight completely without distraction. You're writing this down, he noticed. She'd pulled out her phone and was typing notes. Of course I am. I'm not going to pretend I'll remember all of this without writing it down. I'm not 12. He looked at her. Most people just nod and then call me again when they forget, he said. Most people are wasting your time, she said without looking up from her phone. He had absolutely no response to that. She asked him to stay for coffee. He declined once. She ignored the decline entirely and turned on the coffee machine. He sat down at the kitchen table. Later, he would identify this as the moment he should have paid more attention to. Not the refusal, not the ignoring of the refusal, but his own decision to pull out the chair and sit down without making any further protest. That was where the evening changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, just shifted. The way temperature shifts in a room when someone opens a window. The coffee was extraordinary. He didn't say so. She told him she'd moved from Washington, D.C., not because she'd wanted Richmond specifically, but because of a road trip 2 years ago when she'd driven through in October and thought this city still has its exhale. He asked what she meant. She said D.C. had stopped exhaling. He understood without needing more explanation. He told her he'd been in Richmond his whole life. She said that must be grounding. He said it was something. She asked what word he'd use instead of grounding. He thought about it, really thought, which surprised him, and said, anchored. She asked if anchored felt like safety or like weight. He looked at her across the table. Both, he said, usually at the same time. Something moved through her expression. Not quite recognition, more like the shadow recognition makes right before it arrives. I understand that, she said quietly. Then, my anchor turned out to belong to someone else's life. The kitchen went still. The engagement, he asked. She looked up sharply. I didn't mention. You said technically when I asked if you were a first-time homeowner, and before. You said always renting before. He paused. Before something changed. The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. He counted them. That's very observant, she said. Her voice was careful, not defensive, just careful. Occupational hazard, he said. I spend a lot of time in people's houses. You learn to read what they're not saying. Another pause, then slowly she told him. 18 months engaged. Wedding booked. Life fully planned, the kind of plan that looks perfect from the outside, because someone very carefully built it to look perfect from the outside. A man who loved her the way some people love a beautiful object, admiringly possessively, with absolutely no interest in what the object might want for itself. He wasn't bad, she said, and Ethan heard the specific tiredness in that sentence, the tiredness of someone who has had to defend that nuance to too many people for too long. He wasn't cruel, he just had a very clear idea of who I was supposed to be. And I had been agreeing for so long that I couldn't see where his idea ended, and I began. What made you see it? Ethan asked. She looked at him for a long moment. I was in a meeting, she said. Big client, huge project. And I had an idea, a real one, the kind that doesn't come often. And I didn't say it. I just sat there and didn't say it. Because somewhere in the back of my head was his voice telling me I was too much, too bold, too loud, too much. She stopped. And then the meeting ended, and one of my junior designers said the same idea 20 minutes later, and the client loved it, and I sat there thinking. She exhaled. I have been making myself smaller for so long that I am losing ideas, losing pieces. And I drove home, and I told him it was over. Just like that. Just like that. A pause. He cried. He told me I was making a mistake. He told me I would regret it. She met his eyes. 14 months later, I regret nothing. Ethan set down his mug. He didn't say anything for a moment. Not because he didn't have things to say. He had a lot of things to say, but because this was the kind of story that deserved to be treated carefully. Not analyzed. Not responded to with immediate comfort or mirror story or advice. Just received. You were right to leave, he said. Simply. I know, she said, just as simply. And then because the night had apparently decided it wasn't done with either of them. What about you? She said. You're clearly not with anyone. There's no second coffee mug on the draining rack, no woman's shoes by the door, no photos. You noticed all that? Occupational hazard? She said with a straight face. I design spaces for a living. I read what rooms are saying. He almost smiled, caught it at the edge. Divorced, he said. 2 years. Kids? 1. Sophie. She's 7. She's at her mother's this weekend. Is it? She stopped. I'm sorry, that's not my business. No, it's fine. He was quiet for a moment. It's better now than it was. We're civil. We're parents together. That's what we are now. That sounds hard-won, she said. Every inch of it. She nodded slowly, and he had the distinct uncomfortable feeling of being seen, not looked at seen. The difference was something he'd forgotten existed until this precise moment. He stood up. I should go, he said. She didn't try to stop him. Monday, she said, to look at the pipe. Saturday, he said. I'll be here at 9. Get the parts ordered. I can text you a list. Yes. She stood too, walked him to the door, opened it. The October night came in cool and quiet and smelling of dead leaves and distant wood smoke. He stepped out onto the porch. Ethan. He turned. She was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, loosely looking at him with that expression he couldn't fully categorize yet, the one that was more honest than she probably intended. Thank you, she said. Not just for the pipe. He looked at her for 1 second too long. Get some sleep, he said. Check the clamp before you do. And he walked back across the yard into his own house without looking back. Well, he did not sleep for a very long time. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and listened to the house settle around him, the creaks and exhales of a building he knew so well. He could tell the difference between a cold night groan and a wind pressure flex. He thought about anchors. He thought about a woman who had driven through Richmond on a road trip and remembered that it could breathe. He thought about the way she'd held the flashlight without being asked twice. He thought about Sophie's face when she laughed at something unexpected, and the way his ex-wife Dana used to fill every silence with words, until he'd forgotten what silence felt like, and the 2 years he'd spent learning to be alone without calling it loneliness. He thought about the fact that Lily Harrington had said please to him on the phone like it cost her something, and how he'd picked up his toolbox without a second thought. He was not going to make anything of this. He was going to go Saturday, fix the pipe, be professional and neighborly, and exactly nothing more. He was going to be very, very careful. Because he knew himself. He knew the specific way he could start to care about things quietly, without announcement, the way a pipe fractures under pressure slowly, then all at once. And Ethan Walker was not ready for all at once. He was not sure he would ever be ready for all at once again. He fell asleep at 1:47 in the morning. In the house next door, a light stayed on until almost 2. Neither of them knew about the other's sleeplessness, but the knowing would come later, along with everything else. Yet, some cracks start small. The dangerous ones always do. He showed up at 9 exactly. Not 9:01, not 8:58. 9 o'clock toolbox in hand, work boots already on coffee he'd made himself in a travel mug. Because he had decided firmly the night before, while staring at his ceiling again, that he was not going to sit at her kitchen table a second time and let a conversation go somewhere it had no business going. He was going to fix the pipe. He was going to be professional. He was going to leave. That was the plan. She opened the door before he knocked, same as last time, and she was holding 2 mugs. He looked at the mugs. I already have coffee, he said, holding up his travel mug. That's going to be cold in 20 minutes, she said. This won't be. She handed him the mug and walked back toward the basement stairs. He stood on her porch for exactly 2 seconds. Travel mug in one hand, her mug in the other, and then he followed her inside because he was discovering a particular kind of person whose logic was so simple and so unarguable that resisting it felt more exhausting than compliance. Lily Harrington was that kind of person. He should have noted that earlier. He was noting it now. The parts she'd ordered were laid out on the workbench she'd apparently set up in the corner of the basement, organized by size smallest to largest, each still in its packaging, with the seals unbroken, because she'd wanted him to verify them before she opened anything. There was a handwritten list beside them, cross-referenced with the text he'd sent each item checked off. He looked at the list. He looked at the parts. He looked at her. "You did all this last night?" he asked. "This morning," she said. "I was up early." "How early?" A pause that lasted a beat too long. "Early," she said, and crouched down to check the clamp he'd installed 4 days ago. He let it go, started opening parts. They fell into the rhythm of the work, the way they had the first night naturally, without discussion. The way two people fall into step when they happen to be walking the same direction. She handed him things. He used them. She anticipated the next thing without being told. He noticed that he'd stopped saying, "Can you hand me?" and started just holding out his hand, and she filled it every time. After 40 minutes, he made himself slow down and think about what he was doing. He was fixing a pipe. That was what he was doing. He was absolutely not enjoying the specific, comfortable silence of working alongside someone who didn't fill every quiet moment with unnecessary words. He was not registering the small sounds she made when she was concentrating, a slight exhale, a soft, when something puzzled her. He was not thinking about the fact that she smelled like something clean and warm in a damp basement that otherwise smelled like old concrete and copper shavings. He was fixing a pipe. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You did that last time too," he said. Asked if you could ask. "Is that annoying?" "No, it's polite." He made a careful adjustment. "Go ahead." "Your daughter, Sophie." A pause. "What's she like?" He hadn't expected that question. Of all the directions the conversation could have gone, that was the one he hadn't braced for, which meant it landed differently than the others, lower, somewhere less defended. "She's 7, he said. Then, because that wasn't an answer, "She's funny, not cute funny, actually funny. She has timing. She'll let a joke sit for 10 seconds before she delivers the punchline, and she knows exactly how long 10 seconds is." "She sounds like she has your timing," Lily said. He glanced at her. "I'm not funny." "You're drier than the Sahara," she said completely seriously. "That's a specific kind of funny." He turned back to this pipe. But something had shifted in his chest, not dramatically. Just a small, stubborn movement, like a piece of furniture that has been in one position so long, you've forgotten it can be moved. "She likes soccer," he said after a moment. "And she's terrifyingly good at it for a 7-year-old. Her coach told me last month that she plays like she's already angry at anyone who tries to stop her." "Where does she get that from?" "Not her mother," he said, and then heard himself say it, and added, Dana's even-keeled, good at letting things roll off." "And you're not?" "I'm even-keeled on the outside," he said. "Different situation." Lily was quiet for a moment. "I figured," she said. "The outside doesn't worry me." He stopped what he was doing. Not for long, just a half-second pause, the kind that could be attributed to the work if anyone was paying attention. Then he kept going, but the words sat with him. "The outside doesn't worry me." What an extraordinarily direct thing to say. What an extraordinarily direct woman to say it. He focused hard on the solder joint in front of him and said nothing. It took him another hour to complete the repair properly. In that hour, they talked about things that felt small and were not her first real design project out of grad school, a hotel lobby in Savannah that still embarrassed her when she thought about the choices she'd made. His worst job ever, a deck rebuild in the middle of February, where the client kept coming outside to supervise in a bathrobe. The Richmond restaurant they'd both apparently been to independently, and both independently found overrated. The groundhog Gerald, who had apparently materialized again that morning and stared at her through the back door for 45 seconds. "He was judging me," she said. "Gerald has that energy." Ethan agreed. It was easy. It was so easy it was almost alarming. Ethan had stopped finding conversation easy sometime around year 3 of his marriage, when it had become something that required management rather than happening naturally. He had forgotten that it could feel like this. Like breathing. Like something that didn't cost anything. He finished the repair, turned the water back on, checked the joint from 3 angles. Checked it again. It held. "Done?" he said, and started packing his tools. "How much do I owe you?" she asked immediately. "Parts cost. I'll text you the receipts." "And your time?" "I told you." "Ethan." Her voice was quiet, but it had something in it, not sharpness weight. "I am a professional person who respects professional work. Let me pay you for your time." He looked at her. She looked back. Calm. Certain. The expression of someone who has decided something and will not be talked out of it by anything short of a compelling argument which she clearly did not expect him to produce. "Write me a check for the parts," he said. "And next time Sophie has a soccer game, you could, I don't know, come." He had absolutely no idea why he said it. The words arrived from somewhere he hadn't consulted. Lily blinked. Just once. "You're inviting me to your daughter's soccer game." "It's a public field," he said immediately, because some part of him had apparently decided the best response to vulnerability was to make it sound like it wasn't. "I'm just saying you could come, if you wanted. It's not—" "I'd like that," she said. Simple. Clean. No performance. He nodded. Picked up his toolbox. "Saturday after next, 10 a.m. "I'll be there," she said. And she was. Sophie's team won 3-2. Sophie scored the go-ahead goal in the second half with the focused ferocity that her coach had apparently been predicting since September, and she did not celebrate the way the other kids did, jumping, screaming, looking immediately for the parent in the stands. She just turned, found Ethan's face in the small crowd, and held up one finger. "Like I told you. Like watch me." Ethan laughed. Out loud, unguarded, the real version that he didn't let out very often. Beside him, Lily made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp. "She looked right at you," she said, "like you were the only person on the field." "She always does that," he said, and his voice, to his own mild horror, came out softer than he intended. Lily said nothing, but out of the corner of his eye he saw her look at him for a moment with an expression that he did not examine directly, the same way you don't look directly at something bright. After the game, Sophie came running over with the specific high-energy chaos of a 7-year-old who has just won something and wants the entire world to know it. She stopped when she saw Lily. Looked at her. Looked at Ethan. Looked back at Lily. "Who are you?" she asked. Not rude, just direct. Extremely Sophie. "I'm Lily. I live next door to your dad." "I know," Sophie said. "I've seen your car. It's really clean." "Thank you," Lily said with complete sincerity. "I try. Dad's truck is never clean." "Sophie," Ethan said. "It's true. It's a work truck. It has a French fry under the seat that's been there since March." Lily pressed her lips together. Her shoulders moved slightly. She was containing something. "It's from a good place," Ethan said with great dignity. Sophie looked at Lily conspiratorially. "He thinks if he doesn't talk about the French fry, it stops existing. That's called selective reality," Lily said very seriously. "It's a coping mechanism." Sophie pointed at her. "I like her," she told Ethan. "Good," Ethan said. "Get your bag." Sophie ran off. Ethan stood there, not quite looking at Lily, watching the field. "She's extraordinary," Lily said quietly. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Another silence. The good kind. The kind he'd stopped being afraid of. But this one had something new in it. A weight that hadn't been there before, not uncomfortable, just present. The weight of something accumulating. Something that neither of them had named and both of them could feel. "Ethan," she said. "Don't," he said. Quietly. Without heat. A pause. "Don't what?" "Whatever you were going to say." He picked up his jacket from the bleacher beside him. "Not today." She was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Not today. He told himself that was the right call. He told himself that all the way to his truck, while Sophie talked nonstop about the goal and whether Gerald the groundhog would be impressed and whether Lily was coming to the next game. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe." "You should ask her," Sophie said. "Soph, Dad?" His 7-year-old turned in the passenger seat and looked at him with an expression of such calm, patient certainty that he had the dizzying experience of feeling like the child in the car. "She watched you the whole game." She was watching the game. She was watching you watching the game. Sophie turned back to the window. "There's a difference." Ethan stared at the road ahead. He did not respond. He did not respond because his 7-year-old was right, and he had absolutely nothing to say to that. 3 days later, he knocked on Lily's door to return a level she'd lent him for a reference point during the pipe repair. He'd had it for a week. He could have left it on her porch. He knocked on the door. She answered in paint-stained jeans and a worn university sweatshirt, hair down and loose, holding a paintbrush, and she looked for the first time since he'd met her completely unguarded. Not put-together Lily. Not CEO Lily. Just Lily. It hit him somewhere behind his sternum with a force he hadn't prepared for. "Painting," he said. "Accent wall in the living room." She held the brush up. "I've been staring at that white wall for 3 weeks, and I finally broke." "What color?" "Come see," she said and stepped back. He told himself he would just look at the wall and leave. He stayed for 2 hours. She was painting the wall a deep, warm slate blue. Not navy, not gray. Something in between that she described in terms he didn't entirely understand, but that he could see working even half-finished. She worked with the same precision she brought to everything. She was, he realized, not actually asking for his help or his opinion. She just wanted company. In the particular way of someone who has spent too many months being alone by choice and has recently started remembering what not alone feels like. He sat on the drop-cloth-covered couch and watched her paint, and they talked. They talked about color theory and load-bearing walls, and why Richmond had better barbecue than DC, and whether Sophie had ever expressed any interest in design since she'd mentioned she liked to draw. They talked about Lily's parents, her mother in Phoenix, her father gone before she was 12, and Ethan's parents still together, still in the same house where he'd grown up, still finishing each other's sentences in that way that used to seem mundane and now struck him as quietly miraculous. "What's their secret?" Lily asked, brush moving steadily. "I asked my dad that once," Ethan said. "You know what he said?" "What?" "He said, I never tried to finish her." Lily stopped painting. She turned and looked at him. "What does that mean?" she asked. "He said a lot of men love women like they're a project, like there's a finished version they're working toward, and they'll be satisfied when she gets there." Ethan looked at his hands. "He said he was interested in my mom specifically because she kept becoming someone new, and every time she changed, he was curious about who she was becoming." Lily was very still. "Your father said that," she said. "Not a question. Something else. He's a quiet guy, but when he says something, it tends to be worth writing down." She turned back to the wall, lifted her brush. But she didn't paint for a moment, just held it there, and he could see from the set of her shoulders that something had landed and she was letting it settle. "My ex used to tell me I was too much," she said finally, quietly. "Too ambitious, too loud in rooms, too fast to disagree." A pause. "I used to apologize for it. You're none of those things," Ethan said. She glanced at him over her shoulder. "How would you know you've known me 3 weeks? I've watched you hold a flashlight perfectly still in a flooded basement for 20 minutes, he said. "I've watched you order exactly the right parts in the right sequence without being told twice. I've watched you talk to my 7-year-old like she was worth listening to, which she is, but a lot of adults forget." He met her eyes. "You're not too much. You're just precise. Some people are scared of that." The words came out of him quietly and landed in the room like something solid. Lily looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Ethan became aware of the distance between them, not far, maybe 6 feet her, with the paintbrush him on the covered couch, and the fact that 6 feet felt both very safe and somehow not nearly enough. "Ethan," she said, very quietly. "Yeah," he said. His voice came out lower than he'd intended. "Nothing," she said, and turned back to the wall. But she was breathing differently than she'd been a minute ago. He noticed because he was doing the same thing. He left 20 minutes later. He walked home across the yard in the early November dark and stood in his kitchen for a full minute without turning on the light, just standing in the dark with his hands on the counter. He could feel it, the thing building between them. The way you can feel a storm front moving in before a single cloud appears. That atmospheric pressure change. That shift in the air that your body registers before your mind catches up. He could feel it. And he did not know what to do with the feeling, except what he always did with things that scared him: put his hands on something solid, hold very still, and wait for the right moment to move. The problem was that Lily Harrington was rapidly making it very difficult to stay still. And the Saturday coming, the one where everything would finally crack open, was only 6 days away. 6 days. Ethan told himself 6 days was plenty of time to get his head straight. To rebuild the specific internal distance he'd let erode over 3 weeks of coffee and soccer games and 2 hours watching a woman paint a wall like it was the most natural thing in the world for him to be there. He was a practical man. He believed in practical solutions. The practical solution here was simple. Be a good neighbor, nothing more, nothing less. And let whatever had been building in that November air dissipate the way weather always did when you stopped paying attention to it. He managed 4 of the 6 days without incident. Then Lily texted him on Wednesday evening. Not about the pipe, not about the house. She sent a photo of the finished wall, that deep warm slate blue, fully dry, the couch repositioned back against it, one lamp casting a pool of gold light across the color. And under the photo, just 4 words. My dad would have liked this. No context. No explanation. No indication of what she wanted him to do with that sentence. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, "Tell me about him." Her reply came fast, like she'd been waiting. Maybe Saturday. He put the phone down. He picked it up again and looked at the photo. He put it down again. He did not sleep well. Saturday arrived the way difficult things tend to, quietly, without announcement, looking exactly like any other morning until you were already inside it. He'd told himself he would be at her door at 10. Not 9. 10. A later arrival was a shorter visit, was a cleaner exit. He'd planned it with the same methodical care he planned everything. He was at her door at 9:15. He didn't examine why. She opened the door in jeans and a soft gray sweater, coffee-ready hair down, and she looked at him for a second with an expression that said she'd noticed the earlier time and was not going to mention it. Which was somehow worse than if she'd said something. "I thought we could look at the gutter on the north side," he said, because he needed a reason to be here that lived in the practical world. "The angle looks off, could cause ice damming when the temperature drops." "The gutter," she repeated. "It's a real problem." "I believe you," she said, and stepped back to let him in. He looked at the gutter. It was, in fact, off by about 3 degrees, not enough to matter for another month at least, but not nothing. He made a note to bring a bracket when he came back. He was already assuming he'd come back, which he also didn't examine. They ended up in the basement, not because anything was wrong with it. The repair had held perfectly. He checked it out of professional habit, and it was exactly as it should be. But something about the basement pulled them back. Like that cramped, close space under the stairs had become the one place where the rules of the rest of their lives didn't fully apply. Where she'd told him about her father and her engagement, and the meeting where she'd stayed quiet too long. Where he'd sat on the floor and listened without managing her. They sat on the bottom 2 stairs. She had her coffee. He had his. The basement was warmer than usual. She'd put in a space heater sometime in the last week, which told him she'd been spending time down here organizing, settling in. "Tell me about your dad," he said. She looked at her mug. "He died when I was 11. Heart attack, very sudden, no warning. One morning he was at breakfast, and then he wasn't." She said it the way people say things they have said many times smoothly, the sharpest edges worn down by repetition, but with something underneath that the repetition hadn't reached. He was a carpenter. Not like you, he didn't run a business. He just made things. For the house, for neighbors, for anyone who needed something built. That's not unlike me, Ethan said. No, she said. It's not. A pause. I think that's why I called you that first night. Not just because you were on the neighborhood app. I think it was something about the way you looked. I'd seen you working on your truck, and there was something about the way you moved around a problem. Like you weren't afraid of it. I'm afraid of plenty of things, he said. Name one. The question arrived fast, no warning, and landed directly. He thought about deflecting. He was good at deflecting. This, he said instead. The word sat between them. Lily didn't move. This as in whatever is happening right now, he said. Steady. Quiet. Looking at the wall across the basement and not at her. Whatever has been happening for 3 weeks. I'm afraid of that. The basement was so quiet, he could hear the space heater cycling. Ethan, she said. I know, he said. I know what I'm saying. I wasn't going to tell you to stop. He turned and looked at her then. She was looking at him with that expression he still didn't have a complete name for. The open one, the unguarded one, the one that belonged to the woman in the paint-stained jeans, and not to the CEO with the sleek car and the designer luggage. And she was close. They'd sat down without paying attention to the distance, and now they were close in the way people get in a small space when they stop actively maintaining the gap between them. I'm afraid of it too, she said, simply, for what it's worth. It's worth something, he said. But, I didn't say but. You were about to. He was. He knew he was. The but was always there, the wall he'd built so carefully after Dana, after the divorce, after the long, terrible year of learning how to be a father in 2 separate houses, and a person in one body that kept wanting things he'd decided it wasn't allowed to want anymore. I have Sophie, he said. I know. She has already had one version of her family come apart. I cannot put her through another situation that... Ethan. Lily's voice was quiet, but it stopped him. I am not asking you for anything. I know that. Do you... She turned on the stair to face him more directly. Because you're defending against something I haven't attacked. I haven't asked you for a relationship. I haven't made any demands. I'm sitting in my basement drinking coffee with my neighbor and having an honest conversation. A pause. And you're already building the closing argument. The accuracy of it hit him somewhere between his ribs. Old habit, he said after a moment. Tell me about it, she said. The old habit. What made it? He looked at her. He should not do this. He knew he should not do this, crack open the part of himself he'd sealed with great intention and considerable effort. But she was looking at him with those eyes that didn't let him be vague, and the basement had this quality. It always had this quality of making ordinary rules feel temporarily suspended. Dana and I were together for 8 years, he said. Married for 5. And for most of those 5 years, I believed that if I just worked harder, showed up more fixed, more things the distance would close. He stopped. It didn't. What was the distance about? She wanted someone who was present differently than I am. She wanted someone who talked about what he was feeling in real time, who didn't process everything before he said it, who was more... He stopped again. She said once that loving me was like trying to have a conversation through a closed door. Lily said nothing for a moment. That's a painful thing to hear, she said. It was true, he said. Partly. The part she didn't say was that the door was closed for a reason, that I had learned to close it because the times I hadn't. The times I'd been completely open, it had cost me more than I could afford. What happened when you were open? He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she probably thought he wasn't going to answer. I told Dana I was scared, he said finally. Early in the marriage. About the business failing, about whether I was a good enough father. Sophie was too, about whether I was the man she needed me to be. And she didn't handle it well. She needed me to be certain. She needed the door to stay closed because my fear scared her. He looked at his hands. So I closed the door. And I kept it closed. And eventually, she wasn't wrong that the door was closed, she just didn't know she was the one who'd asked me to close it. Lily was very still. Then she said, "That is the saddest kind of marriage. The kind where you both did exactly what the other person needed at the wrong moment." "Yeah," he said. "That's one way to put it." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It made me a better father. Gave me Sophie full-time half the year. Taught me what I actually need." A pause. "Even if I haven't done anything with the information yet." Lily looked at him. "What do you actually need?" she asked. And that was the question. That was the question no one had asked him. Not his friends, not his mother, not the two women he'd been on perfectly nice and utterly meaningless dates with in the past 2 years. No one had just asked him directly what he needed, like the answer was worth clearing space for. He looked at her. "Someone who doesn't need the door closed," he said. "Someone who can handle what's behind it." The basement was absolutely silent, and then Lily said in a voice that was very quiet and completely steady, "Are you trying really hard not to kiss me right now?" The question arrived like a hand reaching through the wall he'd been building in real time. Not aggressive, not manipulative, just direct. Completely and entirely direct. In the way of a person who had spent 14 months finding her way back to herself and was no longer willing to leave important things unsaid. Ethan looked at her. He did not deflect. He did not redirect. He did not build a closing argument. "Yes," he said. "One word. Absolute truth." Lily exhaled not quite a breath, not quite a sound, something in between. Her eyes didn't leave his. "Why?" she asked. "Because I don't know what comes after," he said. "And I need to know what comes after." "Nobody knows what comes after." "I know. But I have Sophie. And I have a business and a life that I rebuilt from rubble, and I cannot—" His voice dropped. "I cannot afford to be careless with it." "I'm not asking you to be careless," she said. "I'm asking you to be honest." "I am being honest." "You're being careful. Those are different things." He stared at her. The accuracy was infuriating. The accuracy was also somehow the most attractive thing about her, which was its own separate problem. "Lily," he said. "Ethan," she said back. Same tone, mirror of it. "If I—" He stopped, started again. "If this goes somewhere and it falls apart, we live next door to each other. Sophie knows you. Gerald the groundhog knows you." "Gerald is very emotionally resilient," she said. "He'll be fine." "This is not funny," he said. "I know," she said, and her voice lost the lightness entirely. "I know it's not. I'm not treating it like it is." She turned fully to face him. "Ethan, I am not asking you to leap. I am not asking you to decide anything right now. I just asked you a question and you answered it honestly, and I think that is more significant than either of us is admitting." He looked at her for a long moment. "You said you were afraid too," he said. "I am." "Of what specifically?" She didn't hesitate. "Of wanting this. Of wanting something that feels real when I've spent 14 months convinced I had terrible judgment about what's real." A beat. "Of being someone new, the person I'm becoming, and not knowing if she's someone worth choosing." The words landed on him like something physical. "Lily," he said. "Don't tell me I'm worth choosing," she said quickly. "That's not what I need." "What do you need?" She looked at him. "I need someone to be as scared as I am and show up anyway." The space heater cycled. The house settled. Somewhere above them, a car passed on the street outside. He was aware of the distance between them, less than 2 feet now, and neither of them had moved, which meant the distance had closed all on its own in the way distances do when two people stop actively maintaining them. He was aware of her breathing. He was aware of his own. He was aware that whatever happened in the next 30 seconds would not be something he could take back. Not because it would be irreversible, He was not a man who believed in irreversible moments, but because she would remember it, and so would he, and they would both be living next door to the memory of it, for as long as they lived next door to each other. He was aware of all of that, and then he became aware of something else. Something that arrived not from thinking, but from somewhere older and less managed than thought. He was not afraid of her. He was afraid of himself, of wanting something, of letting himself want it fully without immediately beginning the process of protecting against losing it. He was afraid of his own wanting, and sitting in that basement close enough to feel the warmth coming off her sweater, looking at a woman who had just admitted she was terrified and asked him to be terrified with her and show up anyway. Ethan Walker understood something about himself that he had not understood before. The door wasn't closed because it was safer closed. The door was closed because he'd forgotten he was the one holding it. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair back behind her ear. It was a small gesture, deliberate and very slow. His hand barely grazed her cheek. She went completely still, not pulling back, not leaning in, just still, the way something goes still when it's holding its breath. "I'm showing up," he said quietly. "I'm just slow." "I know," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere." He lowered his hand. He did not kiss her, not yet. Because some things, the things that actually matter, the ones you want to keep, deserve to be approached with care instead of speed. He knew this the way he knew pipe joints and load-bearing walls. The strongest connections are the ones made slowly with the right materials when the time and temperature are exactly right. But he stayed. He stayed in the basement for another 2 hours. They talked, and the talking was different now. Warmer, less careful. The specific temperature of conversation between two people who have admitted something true to each other and are now on the other side of it. At one point, she laughed at something he said. Really laughed, full and sudden, and she put her hand briefly on his arm, without thinking about it, and then left it there, and he let it stay. At one point, he said something about his father, and she listened with her whole body, the way she always listened, and he thought, "This is what I forgot was possible. This specific thing." He left at noon. She walked him to the door. He stepped out onto the porch, turned around. She was standing in the doorway again, same as that first night, same crossed arms, different everything. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "The gutter bracket. You said you'd bring one." He looked at her. "Next Saturday," he said. She nodded. "Next Saturday." He walked across the yard. He did not look back this time either. But he was smiling for real, all the way through for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember. And behind him, Lily Harrington closed her front door, leaned her back against it, looked up at the ceiling, and let out a long, slow breath. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She picked it up. A message from a number she recognized immediately. Her former boss, now head of a Boston firm. A firm she had interviewed with 6 months ago, back when she was still deciding what her new life would look like. Lily, the senior creative lead position just opened again. "I want you. The offer is better than before. But I need an answer in 2 weeks. Call me." She stood in her kitchen phone in both hands and read the message 3 times. Through the window, she could see Ethan's house, the light in the kitchen, the shadow of him moving inside. She put the phone face down on the counter. She stood there for a very long time. And the question that had been simple 20 minutes ago, "I'm not going anywhere," became suddenly and without warning the most complicated sentence she had ever said. She didn't call him that night. Ethan noticed the light in her kitchen stayed on until almost midnight. He wasn't watching for it. He just happened to see it when he got up for water at 11:30, and he told himself it meant nothing. People stayed up late. People had things to do. He went back to bed and stared at the ceiling for 40 minutes before his body finally decided to let him sleep. Sunday passed quietly. He did not knock on her door. She did not knock on his. Monday morning, he was loading his truck at 7 when he heard her front door open. He looked up. She was standing on her porch in her work coat, travel mug in hand, and she looked at him across the yards with an expression he couldn't read from that distance. Something complicated, something that had weight in it. And then she said, "Good morning," in a voice that was completely normal and completely not. "Morning," he said. She got in her car and drove away. He stood by his truck for a moment longer than he needed to. Something was wrong. Not wrong like a fight. Not wrong like regret. Wrong like weather, like the pressure had changed, and the change was moving towards something he couldn't yet see. He went to work and spent the day doing what he always did when his mind was running somewhere unhelpful. He focused on the physical world. Measurements. Materials. The satisfying problem-solving of a kitchen renovation in the Fan District, where nothing was square, because the house was built in 1910, and had been settling its opinions ever since. He did not text her. She did not text him. Tuesday the same. Wednesday, his phone rang at 8:43 in the evening. He picked up before the second ring, which told him something he didn't want to examine. "Can you come over?" she said. Not frantic like the first time. Not warm like the weeks between. Something else. Careful. The voice of someone who has been rehearsing. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. She met him at the door without coffee this time, and that alone told him the temperature of what was coming. She stepped back, let him in, and then stood in the middle of her living room, the one with the slate blue wall she'd painted, while he sat on the covered couch with her arms crossed, and her jaw set in the way he'd learned meant she was holding something difficult in place by sheer force of will. "Sit down," she said. "I'll stand," he said. Not defiant, just he needed to be standing for whatever this was. She looked at him for a moment, then nodded like she understood. "I got a job offer," she said. "Boston. Senior creative lead at Harmon Design Group. It's been on the table before I turned it down 6 months ago when I first moved here. They've reopened it." Ethan said nothing. "It's the kind of offer that doesn't come twice," she said. "Except it did, which tells you how much they want me. The salary is—" She stopped. "The salary doesn't matter. What matters is that it's the job I would have designed for myself 5 years ago. The work I actually want to be doing at the scale I want to be doing it." Still nothing from him. He was listening with his whole body. She could see it, the quality of attention he gave things when they mattered. "They need an answer in 2 weeks," she said. The living room was very quiet. "When did you find out?" he asked. "Saturday." A beat. "After you left." He absorbed that. The timing of it, the particular cruelty of it arriving in the exact window after he'd tucked her hair back and said, "I'm showing up," landed somewhere in his chest and sat there heavy and unmoving. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Her voice had an edge now. Not anger, something more like frustration, or maybe fear wearing frustration's coat. "That's all you have." "What do you want me to say, Lily?" "I want you to say something real." "Something real," he repeated. He looked at the blue wall, then back at her. "Something real is, I think you should take it." The room went very still. She stared at him. "You think I should take it? If it's the work you actually want, if it's the scale you've been working toward, yes. That's it." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, barely just at the edge, and she caught it and sealed it back up immediately, but he'd heard it. 3 weeks in a basement and a soccer game and Saturday, and you think I should just take it and go? "I didn't say just," he said quietly. "Then what are you saying?" He looked at her directly. "I'm saying I am not going to be the reason you don't take a job you've been working your whole career toward. I'm not going to be the thing that makes you smaller. I told you what my father said he was interested in, who my mother was becoming. I am not going to become a cage around who you're becoming." The words hit her. He could see it, the slight widening of her eyes, the way her arms unlocked slightly from where she'd had them crossed. "That's—" She stopped. "What?" "That's either the most generous thing anyone has ever said to me," she said, "or a very elegant way of saying you don't want this." "It's not the second one." "Then look me in the eye and tell me you want this." He looked her in the eye. "I want this," he said. "I have wanted this since the night you called me and said please like it cost you something. I have wanted this every day since, and I have been extremely disciplined about it because I have a daughter and a life and a very specific experience of what happens when you want something so much, you stop being honest about it." He paused. "But wanting something does not give me the right to make it smaller to keep it closer. That's not love, that's possession. And I have been on the receiving end of possession, and I will not do it to someone else." Lily was completely still. Then very quietly, "Your ex-wife, she was possessive. She was scared," he said. "There's a difference, but the effect was the same." He exhaled. "She needed me to be certain so she could feel safe. So I performed certainty. I made myself smaller, my fears, my doubts, the parts of me that didn't fit the version she needed, and I did it willingly because I loved her, and I thought that's what love required." A long pause. "It took me 2 years after the divorce to understand that's not what love requires. Love requires honesty. Even the honest parts are inconvenient. And the honest part right now," Lily said, "is that you want me to go." "The honest part right now is that I want you to choose freely," he said. "Those are not the same thing, and you know they're not the same thing." She turned away from him, walked to the window, stood there with her back to him, and he could see the tension in her shoulders that held controlled tension of someone processing something that keeps moving every time they reach for it. "I didn't expect this to be the conversation," she said to the window. "What conversation did you expect?" "I expected you to—" She stopped. "I don't know what I expected. Something easier. Something that let me be angry or relieved or certain." "I'm sorry I'm not easier," he said. She turned around. "Don't apologize for that. Don't ever apologize for that." They looked at each other across the room. The blue wall behind her, the lamplight warm and gold, and the particular weight of two people standing at a decision point that neither of them chose to arrive at this soon. "What if I said I don't want to go?" she asked. "What if I said Boston doesn't matter, and Richmond is where I want to be, and—" "Then I'd ask you to be sure," he said. "Because a decision made because of a person instead of for yourself has a shelf life. I know what it looks like when that shelf life expires. I have lived in that house." She flinched, just slightly. "I'm not Dana," she said. "No," he said immediately. "You are not. You are nothing like Dana. But you are someone who just spent 14 months rebuilding yourself from a version of your life that belonged to someone else. And I will not. I cannot be the next person whose life you reshape yourself around. Not because I don't want you, but because you deserve better than that. You deserve a choice that's actually yours." The silence stretched. Then Lily did something he didn't expect. She laughed. Not a happy laugh. Not a bitter one either. Something in the middle, the laugh of someone who has just been told a truth they needed to hear and are not entirely sure whether to be grateful or furious about it. "You're infuriating," she said. "I've been told. You're infuriating because you're right, and I hate that you're right, and I also—" She pressed her lips together. "I also think you might be the first man in my adult life who has refused to make my choices for me, even when the choice might not go the way you want." "It's possible," he said, that is exactly what I'm afraid of." She looked at him. "Explain that," she said. "I'm afraid," he said slowly, "that I'm doing the right thing and it costs me something I don't get back." He held her gaze. "That's the real honest answer. That's what's behind the door." The room was so still he could hear the neighbor's dog 2 houses down. Lily walked toward him, not rushing, deliberately. She stopped 2 feet away and looked up at him with those eyes that had never once let him be vague. "Then let me be honest back," she said. "I have thought about nothing else for 4 days. I have made spreadsheets. I make spreadsheets when I'm overwhelmed. It's a personality flaw. And Boston is the right career move, and Richmond is the right life move, and I cannot resolve those 2 things into one clean answer." She paused. "But I can tell you that when I imagine calling Boston and saying yes, the first thing I feel is not excitement." "What is it?" he asked. "Loss," she said. Which is new, because 6 months ago when I turned it down the first time I felt nothing. I just wasn't ready. This time I feel loss. She held his gaze. That's because of you. I need you to know that. He said nothing. But something shifted in his face, something he didn't try to hide. I'm not telling you that to manipulate your answer, she said quickly. I'm telling you because you asked for honesty, and that's the honest thing. I know, he said. I know why you're telling me. So what do we do? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, what would a hybrid look like? She blinked. What? The job. You run a consultancy. You work with clients remotely half the time already. I've watched you take calls from your back porch for 6 weeks. He looked at her steadily. What would a hybrid arrangement look like? Consulting contract instead of full relocation. Boston some weeks, Richmond the rest. She stared at him. You've been thinking about this. I think about problems until I find the configuration that doesn't require breaking everything to fix one thing, he said. It's how I'm built. Harmon might not go for hybrid. Have you asked? A pause. No. Then you don't know. She stared at him for another 3 seconds. Then she pulled out her phone, opened her email, and started typing. What are you doing? He asked. Emailing Harmon's director right now before I lose my nerve, she said, to ask about a hybrid consulting structure. She typed for 30 seconds, read it back, and looked up. If he says no, then you have a real decision to make, Ethan said. And I will not make it for you, but it'll be a real decision with real information. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face was doing several things at once, calculating, feeling, deciding, arriving. Ethan, she said. Yeah, come here. He crossed the 2 feet between them. She reached up and put her hand flat against his chest, not pulling, not pushing. Just her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat, which was not, he was aware, entirely steady. I'm not choosing Boston for you, she said quietly. And I'm not staying for you. Whatever I choose, it's mine. You understand that? Yes, he said. And you're not getting rid of me either way. I wasn't trying to. Good. She looked up at him. Because I told you Saturday I wasn't going anywhere, and I meant it. Even if anywhere temporarily involves Boston. He looked down at her hand on his chest, the blue wall behind her, the lamplight, the particular quality of this specific moment that he was going to remember for a very long time. He raised his hand and covered hers, not moving, it just covering it. His hand over hers, over his own heartbeat. Okay, he said. Okay, she said back. And then because the moment was right, and they had both earned it, and neither of them was afraid of it anymore, or rather they were both still afraid, but they were showing up anyway exactly as she'd asked. He leaned down and kissed her. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was the kind of kiss that comes after a long conversation, and not before one, the kind that has already said everything it needs to say with words, and is now just confirming it in the oldest language available. She kissed him back with the same deliberateness. Her hand stayed on his chest. His hand stayed over hers. When they pulled back, neither of them spoke for a moment. The gutter bracket, she said finally. He blinked. What? You've been saying you were going to bring a gutter bracket for 2 weeks. I'll bring it Saturday, he said. You keep saying Saturday. Saturday keeps being right, he said. She laughed. The real one, full, sudden, unguarded. He felt it in exactly the same place he'd felt it the first time in the damp basement under her stairs, and he thought, there it is. That's the thing I've been careful about. That laugh. That specific laugh. He walked home 20 minutes later with her reply from Harmon's director, already drafted in his head, not because he was controlling the outcome, but because he was at his core a man who looked at broken things and thought about how to fix them without destroying what made them worth fixing in the first place. He sat on his couch in the quiet house. His phone buzzed. Lily. He replied, he's open to a conversation about hybrid structure, call scheduled Thursday. He read it twice. then typed back, "Good." She replied with a single period, which was he'd learned her version of smiling. He put the phone down and sat in the quiet for a while. Not the old quiet, the careful managed quiet of a man keeping everything at a safe distance. A different quiet. The kind that happens when something that has been holding itself tense for a very long time finally carefully begins to let go. Upstairs in his daughter's room, Sophie's soccer cleats were drying on the radiator. Her drawings were taped to the wall in a crooked line she'd insisted on making herself. Her life was in this house, rooted and real and non-negotiable. And Lily Harrington was next door, typing emails that might change everything, brave enough to leave a door open when she had every reason to shut it. Ethan Walker sat with both of those truths and did not try to resolve them into one clean answer. He was learning slowly that the best things rarely resolved cleanly. They just held, like a good repair, like a pipe joint made carefully with the right materials given enough time to set. They just held. The call with Harmon's director lasted 53 minutes. Lily told Ethan this over text at 2:17 on Thursday afternoon while he was on a job site cutting crown molding and trying very hard not to check his phone. He checked his phone. The message said, 53 minutes. He wants to think about it. I'll know by Monday. He typed back, "How do you feel?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, like I just negotiated for my own life, which I suppose I did. He read that twice, put his phone in his pocket, and went back to the crown molding. But he was smiling in the private, barely visible way that his apprentice Marcus had been noticing all week without saying anything about it, because Marcus was 24 and perceptive and smart enough to know when to keep his observations to himself. Friday passed, Saturday, Sunday. They had dinner together Saturday, her kitchen, her cooking, which turned out to be considerably better than she'd warned him it would be. Sophie was at Dana's. The evening was quiet and warm and easy in the way their evenings had started to be, and Ethan sat at her oak table and thought about how strange it was that a thing could feel both entirely new and like something he'd been doing for years simultaneously. They talked about his parents, his mother's insistence on calling every Sunday, his father's recent project building a rocking chair in the garage that was taking 4 months because he kept changing the angle of the back support. They talked about what Lily had wanted to be before she wanted to be a designer, a marine biologist, briefly at age 9, until she understood the amount of open ocean involved. They talked about Sophie's latest development, which was that she had apparently decided she was going to learn French, because she had informed Ethan with complete seriousness Gerald probably speaks French. "The groundhog," Lily said, pressing her lips together. "The groundhog," Ethan confirmed. "Your daughter," Lily said, "is genuinely extraordinary." "I know," he said, and the way he said it, quiet, certain, full, made Lily look at him across the table with an expression so unguarded that he had to look down at his plate for a moment. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Just you love her so completely. It's visible from across the room. It's visible from across the yard, honestly. I noticed it before I ever spoke to you." He looked up. "That was one of the first things you noticed. You were teaching her to check the oil on your truck," Lily said. "She was standing on the bumper so she could reach the hood. And you were explaining every step like it was important, and she was listening like it was important. And I stood at my window and thought." She stopped. "What did you think?" he asked. A pause. "I thought that's what it looks like, when someone is really there." The kitchen was very quiet. "My ex was never really there," she said. Not bitterly, just factually. Physically present, yes. Emotionally, he was always slightly elsewhere, always half managing something in his head. I got used to it. I told myself it was fine." She looked at Ethan. "It was not fine." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." She looked at him steadily. "You are always really there." "It's the only way I know how to be," he said. She nodded slowly, like something was settling, like a piece of a question she'd been carrying for a while had just found its answer. He drove home at 10:30, and he sat in his truck in his own driveway for a moment before going inside, just sitting in the quiet dark, and he thought about what she'd said. That's what it looks like when someone is really there. He thought about how long he'd been really there for Sophie, for his clients, for everyone who needed something from his hands, and how long he'd been keeping himself elsewhere when it came to anything that asked for the rest of him. He went inside, slept well for the first time in weeks. Monday morning at 9:04, his phone rang. Lily. He said yes, she said. No preamble. Hybrid contract. 8 days a month in Boston, the rest remote. Consulting rate, full creative lead title, project approval authority. A breath. He said yes. Ethan exhaled. Lily. I know, she said. And her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before. Not happiness exactly, more like the sound of a person arriving somewhere they didn't know they were headed. I know. Are you going to take it? I already did, she said. I signed the letter of agreement 20 minutes ago. A pause. And then I sat on my kitchen floor for a little while. The floor. I process big things on the floor. Don't judge me. I'm not judging you, he said. I'm picturing it. Stop picturing it. I can't. It's already there. She laughed, the real one, the sudden one, and he felt it in exactly the same place he always felt it, and he thought, there it is. That's the thing I was careful about. That's the thing I'm done being careful about. Come over tonight, he said. I'll make dinner. A surprised pause. You cook? I make 4 things. One of them is excellent. Which one? Come over and find out. Another pause, shorter. Okay, she said. And the way she said it, warm, simple, like stepping through a door she'd been standing at for a while, made him close his eyes for 1 second. 7 o'clock, he said. 7? She agreed. And Ethan? Yeah. Thank you. For Thursday, for... She stopped. For not making my choice for me. It was yours to make, he said. I know. That's why I'm thanking you. He made pasta. The excellent one, his grandmother's recipe. The one he'd made Sophie every birthday since she was 3, because Sophie had once declared it the best thing she'd ever eaten, and Ethan had taken that with the full seriousness it deserved. He made it from scratch, which took longer than he'd planned, and Lily showed up at 7 to the smell of it, and stood in his kitchen doorway, and said nothing for a moment. What is that? She said finally. Sit down, he said. 15 minutes. She sat at his kitchen table, simpler than hers, older, with a ring stain from a coffee mug that Sophie had put there 2 years ago, that he'd never quite been able to fully sand out. And she looked around his kitchen, the way she looked at everything with the precise attention of someone who reads spaces for what they say. You have 1 photo on the refrigerator, she said. Sophie, 7 months old. She's making a face. What kind of face? The kind that says she already thinks adults are faintly ridiculous. He stirred without turning around. She's been making it ever since. She's just gotten more articulate about it. Lily was quiet for a moment. Can I see it? You're already looking at it. I meant... A pause. Never mind. He turned. She was looking at the photo with an expression that was soft in a way she probably didn't know he could see from across the kitchen. He turned back to the stove and said nothing, because some things were better received without comment. They ate, they talked. At one point, Marcus's name came up, his apprentice, who had apparently told his girlfriend that Ethan had gone weird in a good way recently, and Lily laughed so hard she had to put down her fork. Gone weird in a good way, she repeated. He's 24, Ethan said. That's the vocabulary available. He's not wrong, she said. I'm the same as I always was. Ethan, she looked at him directly. You are not the same as you always were, and you know you're not. He looked back at her. No, he said. I'm not. The admission arrived quietly and sat between them without drama, which was exactly right, because the truest things rarely needed drama. They just needed to be said. After dinner, he washed, and she dried, which happened naturally without discussion. The way things between them kept happening, gravitating into ease, before either of them had consciously decided to allow it. At one point, she reached past him for a dish, and their arms crossed, and neither of them moved away. "Sophie's coming home Wednesday," he said. "I know. You mentioned. She's going to want to know if you're coming to her next game." "Am I?" "That depends on if you want to." "I want to," she said. Simple, no performance. He handed her the last bowl. Their hands touched in the passing. Both of them noticed, and neither of them pretended not to. "Ethan," she said. "What are we doing?" "I thought that was clear," he said. "Say it clearly." He turned to face her. She was leaning against the counter dish towel over one shoulder, looking at him with the particular expression he had over 6 weeks of basements and soccer games, and slate blue paint, and honest conversations, come to understand as her real face. Not the CEO face, not the composed face, not the carefully managed face. The actual one. The one that showed up in basements and on kitchen floors after good news, and in the specific, unguarded moment of drying dishes in someone else's kitchen. "We're doing this," he said. "Whatever this is, we're doing it. Even with Boston 8 days a month. Especially with Boston 8 days a month," he said. "Because you chose it. Because it's yours. Because I want to be with the version of you that is becoming what she's supposed to become, not a smaller version who stayed for reasons that would eventually feel like a cage." She stared at him. "I keep waiting for the part where you say something wrong," she said quietly. "I say wrong things regularly," he said. "Ask Marcus. Ask Sophie. Ask my mother." "Not to me," she said. "Not yet." "Give it time," he said. "I intend to," she said. He crossed the kitchen. She didn't move back. He raised his hand and cupped her face the same way he had in the basement, slowly, deliberately telegraphing every inch, and she leaned into it before he got there, which told him everything he needed to know about where they were. He kissed her again. Different from the first time, less weighted with held breath, less careful. More certain. The kiss of two people who have already said the hard things and are now on the other side of them. She kissed him back and put both hands flat on his chest, and then grabbed the front of his shirt, which made him feel something he had not felt in so long that it took him a second to identify it as simply joy. Uncomplicated, unmanaged, stubborn joy. When they pulled apart, she kept her hands where they were and looked up at him. "I should go," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. Neither of them moved. "Ethan," she said. "Still here," he said. She laughed, pressed her forehead briefly against his chest, then straightened, smoothed her shirt, picked up her jacket from the chair where she'd left it. "Wednesday," she said. "Sophie's home." "Wednesday," he confirmed. "I'll make something. For dinner. The three of us." He looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She looked back at him steadily. "That's not why I'm offering." He nodded. "Okay." "Okay," she said. And then at the door, "Ethan." "Yeah." "The French fry under the seat of your truck." "What about it?" "Get rid of it before Wednesday. Sophie and I have discussed it, and we agree it has lived long enough." He stared at her. "You and Sophie have discussed the French fry. At the soccer game. She brought it up. I agreed it was time." She opened the door. "Good night." She was gone before he could respond. He stood in his kitchen in the quiet house and laughed out loud, completely alone, full and real, for the first time in longer than he could measure. The weeks that followed were not perfect. They were not a montage of clean and beautiful moments. They were real, which meant they were sometimes complicated and occasionally awkward, and required the kind of ongoing conscious work that nobody's romantic history ever quite prepares them for. Lily went to Boston for the first time 3 weeks after the agreement was signed. 8 days. She texted him from the hotel the first night a photo of room service pasta with a message. "Not even close to yours." He replied, "Recipe is classified." She sent back, "I will get it out of Sophie." He replied, "Sophie already tried. She respects the process." She came back on a Sunday evening. He was in his driveway when her car pulled in, not waiting, just happening to be loading equipment from a weekend job, and she got out and walked across the yards and hugged him first before either of them said anything, which surprised him, and then didn't. "Good trip?" he asked into her hair. "Great trip," she said. "Really great. The project is..." She pulled back enough to look at him. "I'll tell you everything. But first," she looked at him steadily. "I miss this. Specifically this. I need you to know that." "I know," he said. "You're not going to say you missed me too." "Extremely," he said. "I just didn't want to be the first one to say it." She stared at him. "That is the most Ethan Walker sentence I have ever heard." "You're learning the vocabulary," he said. Sophie, it turned out, adored Lily with a straightforward, uncomplicated certainty that children bring to things when the rightness is just obvious to them. She did not ask complicated questions about what Lily was to her father. She simply incorporated her into soccer games, into dinners, into the specific running commentary on Gerald the Groundhog that had become a household institution. She taught Lily 3 French phrases she'd learned from a YouTube video, none of which were grammatically correct, and Lily learned them anyway and used them seriously. One evening in January, 4 months after the flooded basement and the first phone call, Ethan was sitting at his kitchen table going over invoices when Sophie came downstairs in her pajamas. "Dad," she said. "Soph, bed." "I know. Quick question." "Quick. Is Lily going to keep living next door?" He looked up from the invoices. Sophie was standing at the bottom of the stairs with her arms crossed, a pose she had inherited from him without either of them noticing, and her expression was the calm, patient waiting, one that meant she had already thought about this more than she was showing. "For now," he said. "Yes." "And later." He set down his pen. "That's a conversation for later, Soph. I'm just asking." "I know you're just asking." He looked at his daughter, this particular extraordinary person who had arrived in his life and rearranged all of his priorities without once asking permission. Why? Sophie considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. "Because I think she should just live here," she said. "It would be easier. Gerald is already here more than he's at her house. It makes sense." Ethan stared at his daughter. "Gerald lives under her deck," he said. "Gerald goes where he wants," Sophie said. "That's the whole thing about Gerald." She turned and went back upstairs. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, Sophie." He sat at the kitchen table for a long moment after her footsteps faded. Then he picked up his phone and texted Lily. "Sophie has opinions about the housing situation. The reply came in under a minute, I know. She told me last week." He stared at the screen. "She told you last week. When," he typed, "did my 7-year-old become the most functional person in this situation?" Lily's reply: "Approximately birth, I think. She told me Gerald agrees with her. Gerald is a groundhog. Gerald is a visionary." He put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and felt the specific, helpless warmth of a man who has been very carefully outmaneuvered by the 2 most forthright females in his immediate orbit and cannot find it in himself to mind. 6 months after the flooded basement, a Tuesday in April, Lily came home from Boston, her 4th trip, each one shorter, because the work was going well enough that Remote was handling more, and she stood in the yard between their 2 houses in the mild spring evening and looked at both of them. Ethan was on his porch with coffee. Sophie was at soccer practice. The neighborhood was quiet. "I've been thinking," Lily said, "about—" She looked at her house, then at his. "About square footage," she said, "and mortgage math. And the fact that I have been paying rent on a house I am not in at least 10 days of every month." He looked at her, very carefully. "And," he said. "And I'm not proposing anything dramatic," she said. "I'm just thinking out loud." "Think louder," he said. She turned to look at him directly. "I want to be here," she said. "Not next door, here. When I'm in Richmond, I want to be here. With you and Sophie and the French fry-free truck and the world's most opinionated groundhog." A pause. "If that's—" "Yes," he said. "I didn't finish." "You finished," he said. "The answer is yes." She looked at him for a moment. "You're sure?" "I've been sure for a while," he said. "I was waiting for you to be sure." "I'm sure," she said. Then yes, he said. Come home. She crossed the yard and stepped up onto the porch, and he moved over on the step to make room, and she sat beside him with her shoulder against his, and they both held their coffee and looked at the quiet April street, and said nothing for a while. The nothing was full. Full in the way that only happens when two people have said everything that needed saying and can now simply be in the same place without managing it. He thought about the night she'd called. Please, can you just come over? And the way he'd grabbed his toolbox without thinking. He thought about the flashlight she'd held perfectly still. The coffee that was exactly how he took it. The soccer game, and the painted wall, and the basement, and all the Saturday mornings that had added up into something he hadn't planned, and hadn't protected against, and was entirely glad he hadn't. He thought about his father saying, I was never trying to finish her. He thought about a pipe that had been holding pressure for a long time in a house that had been empty, and the particular relief of something finally being allowed to release. Sophie is going to say she knew, Lily said. Sophie did know, he said. Gerald probably knew too. Gerald knows everything, he said. It's unsettling. She laughed. He felt it against his shoulder. He put his arm around her, and she leaned in, and the April evening held them both without asking anything of either of them. Some repairs take time. Some connections need to be made slowly, with the right materials, at the right temperature, with hands that are steady and honest and unafraid of the work. Some things that look broken are just waiting for the right person to show up with the right tools and the patience to do it properly. Ethan Walker had spent 2 years learning how to be alone without calling it loneliness. Lily Harrington had spent 14 months learning how to be herself without apology. They had both done the necessary work separately before they found each other, which was the only reason they were capable of finding each other at all. Love it turned out was not the moment you decided to stop being afraid. It was the moment you decided to show up anyway, afraid and steady and honest, and keep showing up through Boston trips and basement leaks and groundhogs with opinions, and 7-year-olds who knew the truth before the adults did. It was becoming a place someone wanted to return to. And on a Tuesday in April on a porch in Richmond, Virginia, with coffee going cold and spring coming in soft and unhurried, that was exactly what they had built. Not a perfect thing. A real one, which was always, always worth more.